Welcome back to Telltale Books. I'm Emily,
I'm Greg.
and we are going to be going through Daniel Keyes' Flowers for Algernon. I'm really excited that you liked this one.
And well, I read the original novelette years and years ago in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. Their 30th anniversary issue, they reprinted it because it was originally published in, I think it was the April of 1959 issue of fantasy and of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. So I read the original novelette way back when I was a teenager, 1979, in junior high school.
Yeah.
And loved it. Never read the novel, though. Always intended to, but just never got around to it. I've seen the movie Charlie. It was made into a movie.
Yeah.
And I've seen the movie Charlie and loved that. But the Science Fiction Book Club on Facebook chose Flowers for Algernon for their July classic book to read. And so I thought, okay, I don't normally get involved in those things, but I thought, yeah, I want to do that because have always wanted to read this book. And so I got a hold of a copy. The one I could get a hold of quickest was this SF Masterworks edition from Galance, which I'm going to take a minute to really rag on the cover. What do you see as the problem here?
The cybernetics.
Exactly. There's no cybernetics in this book, and they've got all these computer chipboard things
That's not
in a maze.
That has nothing to do with this mouse.
With the mouse's tail becoming a wire running into the...
Makes no
It has
sense.
absolutely nothing to do with the story.
Somebody didn't actually read it.
I mean, as far as I know, there aren't even any computers ever mentioned in the story.
No, as far as I recall, there aren't.
So the cover on this is... It's a neat image. It's a really neat image. I do like it as an image, but it's crap as far as the book goes.
Yeah, it tells you nothing about the book except that there's a mouse, which is true.
Okay. So, I'm gonna get into the synopsis because I want to start with the novelette.
Go ahead.
Okay, the original novelette. First of all, the original novelette, published in 1959, won the 1960 Hugo Award for Best Novelette. Okay, the novel won the 1966 Nebula Award for Best Novel of the Year. And the movie Charlie from 1968, starring Cliff Robertson, netted Cliff Robertson a Best Actor Oscar.
Nice.
Okay, so this book, everybody knows what I now know, how brilliant this story really is.
Top tail, officially.
And the original story also was, I read it and I loved it. I thought it was a brilliant story. I thought it was great. The basic story is you have Charlie Gordon. He has an IQ of like 60.
Yeah, some kind of cognitive impairment.
Yeah, he was born that way.
Yeah.
And that happened. In my day, we called them retarded. That word is not
politically
sanctioned
correct
anymore. But, I mean, in my day, a lot of the description of how those people were treated in this story was accurate. People made fun of them. People played jokes on them. People treated them like total crap because they were morons.
Yeah, and this was written before the ADA laws.
Yeah.
So you were able to legally kick them out of your establishments if they were in public and disruptive, or if you just didn't like the way they looked. You literally could discriminate against them so hard. Like, they couldn't even go ahead and have bank accounts. Like, you could just refuse service altogether. It was a really rough time for people with special needs.
And people were afraid of them because they viewed them as animals, and with wild animals, you're not certain when they're going to attack.
Yeah.
And that's how they were treated. That's how rational human beings treated these people with special needs. And I remember in junior high school, I don't know if this was true when you were in school, but they were in my junior high school, they were in special classes.
Yeah, they still were in my...
in those classes in public school. And but they were outsiders completely.
Yeah. We had a
And
similar
treated as
situation where
outsiders.
they would come in homeroom for like movies and things like that, but they were often in a separate classroom doing
Mm-hmm.
their level of work,
Yeah.
whatever that was, and oftentimes it was very menial.
So the description of Charlie Gordon in the original novelette, and there's a big difference between the novel and the novelette. In the
Mhm.
novelette, he's working at a plastic bottling factory.
Mm-hmm.
Still as a janitor,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
he's not working in a bakery. In the novel, he's working in a bakery.
Yes, I remember that.
Okay, so that's a big difference, but the guys he worked with had the same names and did the same things.
Mm-hmm.
Which of course was play jokes on him and laugh at him
Make
because
fun of him.
make fun of the fact that he was an idiot. And Charlie Gordon he thought they were his friends and he thought they were
Mm-hmm.
laughing with him,
Not at him.
and he thought it was funny too, and so he would laugh with them and have no clue what they were doing to him. So anyway, these scientists, Niemer and help me out. What's the
I
guy's
can't
name?
remember. It was a long time ago.
And of course, I can't land on a page that has his name there. Niemer and Strauss or something like
Yeah.
that, started with an S. One was a surgeon, a brain surgeon. And the other was a psychologist, psychiatrist, behavioral psychiatrist, and they developed a method by which they can augment the intelligence, and they had been trying it on mice.
Mm-hmm.
All their previous attempts had regressed and died, and so then they had a mouse called Algernon, which they did their procedure to, and Algernon kept living and kept getting smarter. So they got permission, and here's the weak point in the story. From our experience today, they would never get permission so easily to just jump to experimenting on human beings.
Yes, agreed.
But maybe it was different in 1966.
Maybe
back then, doing these kinds of because I mean, in the 1950s they did all kinds of experiments on all kinds of people that they really shouldn't have done.
Yeah.
In 1966,
and in this
there
case,
may have still been going on, and
because he wasn't really viewed as a person.
Right.
They probably saw him as more of a burden to society, so they were like, well, go for it.
So they get permission to perform their experiment on Charlie Gordon. And it's actually Charlie Gordon's teacher, Miss Kenyon, who suggests him for this procedure because Charlie Gordon constantly showed a desire to learn far beyond the other students that she had in her class, in her special needs classes. So Charlie gets the operation, and he starts to become more intelligent, and he starts to become a lot more intelligent to where he outstrips Niemer and Strauss and reaches a level of genius beyond
basically
anybody
a savant
else
without any inhibitions.
Yeah. Problem is, emotional growth doesn't happen.
No.
Just because you augment someone's intelligence. So Charlie is trying to deal with all these, because the different feelings that you go through as you're growing up, he had hitting him really fast, and he didn't have the ability to deal with it, which really played havoc with his life, in particular when he became intelligent enough to see how people had been treating him, and to look back on himself and what he was, and he's always haunted by what he was.
Yeah.
And then
dealing with a lot of guilt and shame surrounding that.
I'm going to spoil this, sorry.
Go
it's
ahead.
1959 and 1966, and there's a movie out there that won an Academy Award. So I'm just going to spoil this because I think a lot of people know the story. Algernon starts to revert and starts becoming violent as he reverts. And then Charlie Gordon starts to revert. And, of course, reverts all the way back to what he used to be. So the story is ultimately extremely tragic.
Yes.
because he knows what's happening. He
He's
discovered
aware.
that Algernon was going to revert, and he
Mhm.
did the science which his doctors weren't capable of doing. They weren't intelligent enough to do. He did the science and wrote a paper called the Algernon-Gordon effect,
Mhm.
which showed how he was going to revert and how it was not preventable.
Mhm.
And so he knew what was going to happen to him, and he knew it as it was happening to him. Now, the thing to remember, this whole story is written, what do they call that, where you do letters? There's a name for that type of story. This is all Charlie, the whole story is Charlie Gordon's progress reports.
Mhm.
So the early parts of the
It's
story,
like journal entries.
yeah, the early parts of the story is written the way someone with an IQ of 60 would write, with all the spelling mistakes and poor grammar and very low perception of what's going on.
Very surfacey.
And
Yeah.
so as you read this, you're reading from Charlie's perspective, his progress reports, and you're seeing in his words how he is becoming more intelligent. And the style of the writing changes
Yes.
with Charlie's level of intelligence, and then toward the end it changes again to go down with the Charlie's level of intelligence, which that in and of itself was genius.
It was a fantastic way to write.
It really makes
the phonetic spelling was really fun to try.
Oh, yeah.
Try being dyslexic and reading that. By the way,
Um,
it's really hard.
I tried. I started trying to read All the Pretty Horses
Mm-hmm.
by Cormac McCarthy because of his recent death,
Mm-hmm.
and hated it because he hasn't used damn punctuation,
Yeah.
and he's not doing it for any reason except that he felt like being clever,
Yeah. No.
which
Dumb.
really pisses me off when artists are that.
Self-righteous, I think. I find it self-righteous.
Yeah,
personally.
I'm not finding the correct word for
Yeah.
it, but when they see
Avant-garde.
themselves as such great artists that they can just drop all the punctuation and not care,
Yeah.
and it makes the book just hard to read for no good reason. In this case, it had a point. It had a reason.
Yes.
Daniel Keyes did it because
It
it
was
really is what that
propelled the
person would have
storyline.
done.
Yeah.
You know, it's the way Charlie Gordon would have written his progress reports if he was a real person.
Yep.
It had a point, it had a reason, and so Daniel Keyes, in my opinion, is a far greater author than Cormac McCarthy, because he was able to do it for a good reason. He had a reason for doing it.
Tell us how you feel about that statement in the comments below.
Yeah.
Anyway.
not just because he felt like it, but because it was essential to establishing this story as strong as it is. Okay, so now fast forward to 1966. He wrote the novel, and going into this, I was thinking it's just going to be the novelette with a lot of extra detail.
Yeah.
Otherwise, just the same. And on the surface, that is what you get. It's the same story. Some details are changed. You get more detail, but
Get a longer basic report and journal entries.
Daniel Keyes wrote that detail in a way that enhances this story. I thought the novelette was brilliant. This book just goes so far beyond that novelette.
It really is. It's so brilliant.
So, I read this over the last 2 days. I couldn't put it down, and my mind is blown at how unbelievably perfect this novel is in every way. I mean, it's a science.
Not huge. Look at this.
No, it's 216 pages in this
not
edition.
huge. Yep, it's not 216, and it is very fast paced. I remember that much.
And it's a science fiction book. It draws upon a lot of great literature. I mean, you've got the story is pulling from the expulsion from paradise in the Bible. So it's also pulling from Milton's Paradise Lost,
Yes.
which is mentioned in the novel.
Yes.
It's also pulling from the myths of Prometheus and the myth of Icarus. And it's also rewriting Frankenstein
Essentially, yes.
with the monster that
Being Charles.
outstrips its creator. and ends in tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's Frankenstein.
Yep.
And it does all this without feeling like any of them. It doesn't even feel like a science fiction novel. It feels like contemporary literature.
Yes.
He pulls all that stuff together and just weaves it into a perfect novel that transcends anything that science fiction writers had written at that time.
Yeah.
And then he paints a picture of a character. This is a character story.
Mm-hmm.
It's a science fiction story. It has ideas, but it's a character story also. It's all about
In the
Charlie
first person,
Gordon.
in fact. Mm-hmm.
It's all
Which is
about
really
Charlie
cool.
Gordon. And more specifically, it's about this mentally disabled person and how these people were treated. You know, you gotta remember this was written before laws were passed, like she was saying.
Mm-hmm.
People really were treated this way back then. And you get the view from his eyes, especially there's a part where he goes, growing up, his mother, when he was the only child, his mother kept believing, no, he's a normal kid, he's going to snap out of it, he'll be fine.
He'll learn
But
just
then
fine.
she had her daughter, and then she kind of like turned against Charlie and wanted to just get rid of him because he was never going to get better, he was never going to be okay.
He was always going to be a disappointment.
She was afraid that he was going to do something nasty to his sister, and ultimately forced her husband to try and put him in this Warren home, was it? I forget the
a group
exact
home
one.
of some kind.
It was a group home. So her husband finally caved in and put him there, even though he thought it was not the right thing to do. He finally did that, and then he kind of just took off on his wife and left her alone because he couldn't deal with her anymore. He was felt so much guilt over this whole situation. And but he had an uncle that pulled him out of this home and got him a job at this bakery, where the owner of the bakery agreed to always give Charlie a job. He was just a janitor. It's all he could do is clean the toilets, sweep the floors, but it was a job. It was income. He was able to live on it. He had a modest apartment, and he was able to go to school at night, Miss Kenyon's classes, and try to improve himself because he really wanted to be smart. And so when this opportunity came along for the operation, they asked him if he was okay with it, and he said absolutely, and not the word absolutely because he didn't know what that word was.
He just said
but he agreed, and because he really wanted to be smart, because he wanted friends, he wanted people to like him. He didn't want to be dumb. He didn't want to be this outsider. He didn't want to be different from everybody.
I think too, like in an aspect, he wanted to prove his mom wrong too.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of that in there.
Yeah. So that's the character, and so then Charlie has the operation, and you see through his progress reports. First of all, him right before the operation, they have him try to draw. Algernon was run through a maze. And they kept changing the maze on Algernon with food at the end to test Algernon's progress of intelligence. So when Algernon was there and was able to do the maze pretty easily, they sat Charlie down with Algernon. Charlie had the maze on paper, and Charlie had to draw through the maze and get to the end and beat Algernon. And of course he couldn't do it. Algernon beat him. And that crushed him, that he was so stupid that a mouse could beat him. But they told him right away, no, Algernon's a special mouse. He's had this operation. He's far more intelligent than any other mouse. And that made Charlie feel a little better.
Yeah.
So then you see these progress reports as he eventually gets to where he can beat Algernon. And then he starts studying languages and science and just gets into all these things, and his intelligence goes far beyond anybody else. But what he found in doing that is that having that intelligence didn't get him friends, didn't get him acceptance. He was still he was still being treated as an experimental object, as a lab rat,
Yeah.
as a guinea pig, and still being seen as this outsider and a curiosity, and people were still afraid of him. And he actually lost his job because everybody that worked there, you know, he was smarter than they were now, and so they didn't like that. They got scared of him.
And he'd talk back and start asking questions of, why are you doing this to me? Or why does it have to be like this?
Well, and he came up with ways of getting the job done that was better than anything any of them were ever.
So they were
able to
threatened,
do, which saved their boss money. So they felt threatened, and they got up a petition and got him fired from his job at the bakery. You know, so through the whole book, he is still just an outsider. It's just becoming intelligent only makes it
it didn't solve
apparent to him how cruel people are towards somebody like this. And I gotta say, it was very hard for me to read.
It's heavy subject matter, that's for sure. My mom warned me about that one because I had read this. We read an excerpt of this in a textbook for my English class at one point, and I had told my mom about it, and I was like, I really want to read that book. And she's like, I've read that book, because my mom was a special education teacher, and Flowers for Algernon is a very deep book about special education and understanding the human psyche and understanding how people were treated, especially because she was a special education teacher before the laws all passed. So she understood and saw firsthand how a lot of people were treated as a caretaker who would assist a lot of mentally disabled or special needs people. And in fact, she had to pretend at one point in her degree to be blind. No, she was the one of her friends had pretended to be blind. She had to pretend to be in a wheelchair. And there she could not count how many times she was referred to as an it by people in the public. So it was really interesting. But yeah, so she highly encouraged me. We went to the library right away and got this book, and I read it. And it is very heavy subject matter. Talks a lot about, I found it more fascinating even as a kid, to see the human development, because I was in middle school at the time, so puberty was hitting. And there's a point where he kind of has a puberty hitting moment where he suddenly is realizing, he has sexual urges and other things going on. And I found that very fascinating, that his development was so similar to my own in a lot of respects as he was gaining intelligence. He was just experiencing it as an adult already, whereas I was experiencing it as a whole, human experience. Whereas he's just having it, thrust upon him in a very short period of time. But yeah, it was very, very interesting and very heavy subject matter. And I remember being done with it, I was like, I love and hate, crying to my mom. I'm like, I love and hate this book at the same time. Because it was so good, but it was so heavy. And I was like, I think everybody should read this book. And I still believe that. I think every human needs to read that book. Yeah. For sure.
Later in the book, and sorry, Samantha, if I'm spoiling the hell out of this, I promised I wouldn't.
You can't not.
Yeah,
you can't not.
I gave warning when I was getting into spoilers. So, yeah. But hopefully she is still with it, because it's just...
It's such an important work.
There's so many important things to talk about in this. And so later in the book, he talks to Strauss and Niemeyer about what was their plan if, because all the previous mice had regressed. Yeah. And now Algernon was showing signs of regression. What was their plan for him? And their plan was they were going to get him back into that Warren home. I might be mixing up the name. That might be the foundation.
The group home of some kind. Yeah.
But there's a group home with a similar name.
Yeah.
That I think I'm getting them confused. Anyway, so he decides to arrange for a tour of this place.
Oh, yeah.
And so they take him into it.
Oh, shit, yeah.
And it was a pretty, unlike a lot of the horror stories we hear about places like this from the past, this place was pretty good. They said, he asked them, because there was no gate around it. Yeah. And he asked them, what if somebody wanders off? He said, well, Usually they come back, or the police catch them and bring them back. But
Mhm.
we don't want to do that to them. So it was a pretty humane
Yeah,
place.
they were doing their best. But I remember the issues he was having when he was just witnessing the type of people there.
Yeah, he knew he was going to become one of these people.
Uh-huh.
And there were a lot of them that were in a crib soiling themselves.
Mm-hmm. And
the employees there had to clean them up and stuff constantly because they just couldn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And he at this point he wasn't sure just how far back his regression would take him, if it would just take him back to the IQ 60 or if it was going to take him all the way back to having no brain whatsoever.
Yeah, and becoming a vegetable essentially.
So we get a glimpse, and I'm assuming, obviously I don't know, I'm not the expert, but I'm assuming Daniel Keyes did his homework on this and reported accurately on what a place like this was like in 1966. And so you get a glimpse of what it's really like to be one of these people living in this way and what had to be done for them. And you also, something that's unexpected, and he emphasizes it by having Charlie go and visit his mother, and that is the regression that Charlie is going through, and a lot of the situation of the people that he would have been going to live with in this home mirrors what you get with dementia and Alzheimer's.
Yes.
So and his mother was kind of demented when he visited her. She wasn't all there. So this book also brings in the subject of old age, and the whole book can be seen as kind of a metaphor for life, going from being a child where you don't know anything, where you are basically IQ 60 when you're 5 years old, and you do soil your pants and you don't understand things, to gaining this knowledge, and then in your later years your mind is declining and you end up mindless in a home. The whole novel then becomes a metaphor for life.
Yes. Yes. It is such a big subject.
When I finished this novel, my mind was blown because it is so many things.
It is.
All rolled up in one.
Yes.
Oh my God, it is so incredibly brilliant, like nothing else I've ever read. I've never read a novel that had this many layers and this much meaning packed into 200 pages.
And being still so very human and not feeling far-fetched in any manner. It feels so even and so paced in a way that it's very realistic. And it was also like, that's one of the things I appreciated too. I read this during the time when I was super into like diary style books.
Yeah. And
that's what appealed to me at first. But this is such a big subject. I probably should not have read this at age 10, 11 when I read this, but it changed my worldview so much. And then it's interesting too, because on top of that, I was reading this at the time when I was very recently diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And I am experiencing, like, one of the issues that I had is when my blood sugars would be bad and I was in class, I could not retain information. Like, I would forget, there would be entire days that I don't remember. Or something in 5 minutes where I remember at one point in math class, I had someone assisting me because I really struggled with math.
Yeah.
And I had a gal who would come into class and sit with me and assist me. And I remember telling her I noticed a numerical pattern. And I couldn't remember what it was. But I remember telling her, oh, this is in multiples of blah, blah, blah. And she's like, oh, yeah, you noticed that. Good. I'm really proud of you for that. Then the teacher asked, and she said, Emily knows. And I could say nothing. I couldn't remember for the life of me. And when I stared at it, it was gone. And just going through that process of knowing, like, I feel so stupid, even though I know I wasn't. I noticed the pattern before. But because my blood sugars had swung because it was after lunch, I couldn't retain the information.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, like, really made me face myself. So I was reading this at a time where this was extremely relatable to myself.
Yeah, because that's actually what's happening to Charlie when he's regressing.
Exactly. It's like,
reading
I
his
know
own progress
this.
reports and
Why?
not remembering.
Yes, and I remember having a lot of trauma associated because I was just being put back into public school because my mom's had homeschooled us.
Mm-hmm.
And it had been really, and I really loved learning. And of course, when you go into a public school environment, if teachers make fun of you, the kids feel like they can make fun of you too.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in our society, there's a lot of guilt and shame surrounding the education of children. And if you can't spit back correctly, you get made fun of. That's just how American culture is.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so it hit me really hard to read this, and which is why I both loved and hated the book, and why it was such an emotionally impactful thing for me. It's like, because I felt like I was going through a lot of this, and it was during a time too where I was also being tested for learning disadvantages because they knew my diabetes had probably affected my brain enough before I was diagnosed and better controlled that there were a lot of gaps in my learning. And as I was young and understanding those things, it was so upsetting. Because, like, to this day, I really struggle with hand clocks. Mm. Because during the period of time when we were learning how to tell time on a hand clock, I didn't actually learn until I was a senior in high school how to do it. Because there were so many gaps in my learning and so many other things where I was smart, I loved reading, I loved learning, and I loved when I could retain information, I was so proud of myself, but there were so many things that I had missed just because I was present, but my blood sugars prevented me from retaining the information.
Yeah.
And, like, so this really hit hard for me and was probably not the best emotional time for me to have read it, but also it impacted me so much and changed my worldview about people who were disabled. I already had a mom who was already teaching me a lot about people with disabilities because she was a special needs teacher, and we had them around a lot in our lives. But it gave me so much more empathy because now my situation technically made me disabled.
Yeah.
And so, like, it took so much, and it's like, oh, this has a bigger impact for all humans, not just people affected by it. Mm-hmm. And it was just really interesting and a really great read, so.
I don't think there is a good time to read this
book
for anybody that can identify
I
with
feel like I was very young to have read it. I probably should have been a little more emotionally mature at the time, but it was very relatable. I think
even as an adult, though, because for me reading it, there's just so much. This is the most disturbing book I've ever read.
Yeah. It is.
People on YouTube talk about all these disturbing books where people are being tortured or, cut up or whatever, horror books. Yeah. No, this beats them all.
This is a psychological horror, really, when you think about it.
Because it's so real and deals with things that actually happen, that some of us actually go through.
Yes. You could have a brain injury and have this happen to you tomorrow.
Well, yeah, but I mean, for me, when I was a kid, I wasn't a moron. I was intelligent, but I was still an outsider and was still treated the way Charlie was. But I was smart enough to know that I was being treated badly.
Yeah.
And it hit me really hard to where I couldn't function anymore for quite a while. Mm-hmm. And the person I was through junior high and high school still haunts me the way Charlie was haunted by his old self in the book. And, where he would look in a window and see the old Charlie Gordon staring out at him with vacant eyes and be bothered by it. And those passages just connected with my own experiences in a way that this is the only novel I have ever cried through.
Yes.
I've kidded Samantha about crying at the end of books or whatever. And
this is your first experience.
I mean, I was crying all the way through it.
Yeah.
It rips you apart.
It does.
And
it is deeply emotional.
In a way that you can't write a more disturbing book than this, but that is precisely why I consider this so much better than most of the great books that people talk about, because it just it is so much more human. It is so much more imaginative. It is so much more complex. It has so many different meanings and so many different levels.
It really is a
And
book for
connects
everyone.
with so many different people.
It is a book for everyone, literally.
Yeah.
There is no no man, woman, or child should get.
I mean, even if
or
you
them,
can't,
they are.
even
you know?
even if you can't identify with what Charlie Gordon goes through, all the more reason why you should read it to understand why you're treating those people.
And
like
quite
crap.
honestly, there's no way you can't identify with him. Because we all have human conflicts with coworkers. We all have human conflicts.
But there
with...
are the people, the Franks of the world that treat people like that, that should read it just to understand why they are dirtbag scum.
Yes. Great. So yeah, unless you're a psychopath, there's no way you can't really relate to this book, though.
Yeah.
There's so many very human moments that are very worthwhile. So, yeah, everybody read it.
The amazing thing is Daniel Keyes, he wrote a lot, but not a lot of science fiction. I think he wrote a lot of mystery, but I couldn't find a bibliography that lists any of that. So there's not a whole lot to find by Daniel Keyes. And his other stuff is nothing like this that I know of. I haven't read it. I'm going to dig as much of it as I can down and read some of it to see if he wrote anything else that came close to this, because this is like a masterpiece. This is like the Mona Lisa of literature.
It is.
Nothing else quite like it in all the history of literature. It's just mind-blowing, and you stand and just think, how could he write something so fucking brilliant? You know?
Yes.
So far above anything else I've read. You know, like I say, so far above Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I don't know who that is. I'll figure it out someday.
Cormac McCarthy?
Yeah.
He just died. All the Pretty Horses, Blood Meridian,
you just said that.
The Road.
See? Blood Sugar's probably fucked up because I can't remember what you said 5 minutes ago.
No Country for Old Men.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yes. I'm there.
He was considered the greatest living American writer until he died in June.
And now he did.
Now he's dead.
The greatest dead writer.
No. Daniel Keyes is dead.
Dead.
I think he died in 2014.
Oh. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I knew he was dead. I just didn't know when.
Yeah.
I assumed actually he was dead. But yeah.
So, you know, I won't say that The Time Machine is not the #1 book ever. I just won't do that. No matter what book you throw at me, I won't budge from that
definitely
one.
number 2.
But this one definitely cemented itself at #2 in my mind.
And Greg is very picky.
Definitely a top tale.
For sure. For sure.
Undoubtedly. I mean, the top tale of top tales. Okay.
I'm so glad you read it, because this was a life-changing book for me.
Yeah.
So.
Me too.
Yay. If one can say yay about something so tragic.
Yeah, well, the problem now is that everything else now...
Yeah, everything else is just going to suck after this. I hate when that happens, where you're mourning a book because it's like, now nothing else will ever live up to this.
Samantha wants me to read Pride and Prejudice, and I said it's probably not going to live up to this one.
Yeah, we're just going to redo our entire Top Tales list now, because everything's going to be compared to Flowers for Algernon.
I almost want to say, this is the only book you need to read.
Ever.
Throw all of them out. Throw all the rest of them in the garbage. No, that's not true.
Literature is so subjective. There are probably people who are going to read this and be like, I hated it. And you know, that's okay though. That's okay to hate it, because there's a lot of facing yourself that it does, and that's very uncomfortable.
But I always have noticed the people that were in the special education programs and just kind of empathized with them for some reason. You know, like I say, being an outsider was part of it, but I'm not dumb. I am pretty smart. I always have been pretty smart, but there's just something about their situation that connected with me, and that I always saw as tragic, and that hurt me to see them. And this book just takes that and shoves it in your face, and makes it impossible not to see the tragedy and the horror of how we treat special needs people.
Especially
how
when you
we-
think
How
historically.
we treat anybody that's different from us.
The kill it because it's different mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And I often think too of like the unwanted rooms. They
Mhm.
used to be in people's attics where they basically kept their special needs children, or
Yeah.
like most special needs kids before group homes were like a thing. It
Or
was
the room
asylums.
in the attic in Jane Eyre.
Yes, exactly. But like that was normal.
Mm-hmm.
That was normal to keep those people basically in a cage.
Mm-hmm.
And those are humans. And
Well,
yes, I have a lot of inner conflict about people with special
It
needs.
was normal to put a spike in these people's brains.
I know. Lobotomies were a thing.
Yeah.
Like, we just did that
Mm-hmm.
because we thought it would help. And
It
it's
was normal
just,
to bleed these people,
Mm-hmm.
thinking
To
that we're
mutilate
getting
them.
rid of their demons.
Yeah. To mutilate humans.
You know, who really was the morons?
Yeah.
The morons or the morons that were trying to cure them?
Yeah. And honestly, like, what's wrong with having someone be who and what they are?
Yeah.
As long as they're not hurting anyone. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about all special needs kids. Some of them do get violent at
Very
times.
violent, yes.
But Charlie was, and it's stated in this book how Miss Kenyon says that, how before the operation he was just such a decent, likable person that never had a unkind word for anybody. And when he gained intelligence, he changed. And he was angry and dark and brooding and argumentative and started fights and stuff. But it's because he was seeing how he had been treated and how he had been too dumb to see that people were treating him like shit.
Yeah. It's
That he became violent and had this anger. And there's a scene in a diner where there's a special needs kid that was employed as a bus person, and he drops the dishes. That's in the movie too.
And he gets made fun of, yes.
And everybody's laughing at him and calling him names and saying job opening and stuff like that. And Charlie stands up and just shouts at all of them that they should try to have some sympathy for him.
Yeah.
Because he knew he was one of them. And I think in the movie he goes over and helps the kid pick up the pieces of the dishes. In the book he just storms out.
Yeah.
And the movie too. If you've never seen the movie, watch it. Cliff Robertson is one of the most brilliant actors ever to have pulled that role off. Because you really believe that he has an IQ of 60. And then when he's a genius, you really believe he's a genius. And then when he reverts back, and the final scene of that movie is just so powerful, because Miss Kenyon sees him in a park and he's on a swing and he's back to being a complete moron again, acting like a 5-year-old child, just smiling at the world and playing and oblivious
the ignorance
to
is
all
bliss,
the ignorant, completely oblivious to all the horrible things that he went through and had been done to him, which was kind of a final blessing, that he should forget all of it, because it was not a good journey. But it, like I say, it references the expulsion from the Garden of Eden in that Charlie Gordon bit the fruit of the tree of knowledge, and in doing so understood all of his sins.
Yep.
And all the sins of the world, and it destroyed him.
Yes. And I honestly, I even talk to my friends about that too. It is very difficult to be an intelligent person because you're very prone to depression. Because not only do you understand the problem, but you understand maybe not all the aspects, but all the different complexities, or most of the different complexities of an issue. And it gives you a sense of hopelessness, because when you think about human nature and how we're prone to failure, there is no solution.
But also just that thing of knowing that you're not like everybody else, that you are an outsider, that you are different.
And you feel bigger and deeper. You feel big and deep feelings a lot.
For me, it did stunt my emotional growth, just like Charlie was. When he was getting more intelligent, he didn't know how to deal with the feelings that he was going through, and neither did I when I went through all those years. It took me into my late 20s before I started to pull out of that.
One of the things my mom says is, and I relate it entirely to this book, is sometimes the more you know, the less you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what this book is about. The more you know, the less you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Tour de Force, brilliant book.
If you don't read it, you're dumb. You have an IQ.
This is one of those books they make you read in school because you should read it.
It is important. Yeah, they didn't make us read the whole book. I did that on my own. They just made us read an excerpt, like a series of excerpts from the book.
Yeah, I never had to read this in school.
Everybody should.
Yeah.
The whole thing. Not just like the little excerpts.
But you
from
shouldn't
the
be made
textbook,
to read it. You should pick it up because you want to, because it is just.
It is an important work.
It's an enjoyable novel. There's a lot of humor. Like I posted online when Charlie is trying to learn spelling, and Miss Kenyon is correcting him. You know, and this is after the operation, but just after the operation, and he's realizing that. You spell through THROUGH, and pronounce it like through a ball, but you don't pronounce ENOUGH like inu. You pronounce it enough.
And it just tells you how complex the English language is.
Yeah, but he states how did it go? Something like. I didn't know. I'm spelling. They sound like the way I used to spell them, but that's not how they should be spelled, and I'm confused. And Miss Kenyon tells him, "That's okay. Spelling doesn't make sense."
Yeah, that's okay. Spelling doesn't. It doesn't. All words are made up.
That was hilarious.
All words are made up.
There's a lot of little moments like that just it makes the book a joy to the funny things, the tragic things, everything about it just makes it such an enjoyable book to read. And I normally don't read a book in 2 days, but I could, I wanted to
finish it. It is a real page turner, and I feel like everything is so fast paced.
Yeah.
So it's really nice. It's easy to breeze through. It all runs into each other very well and seamlessly. Because it's not really separated, it's kind of separated into chapters, but not really.
Progress reports.
Yeah, progress reports. So it's kind of feels like you don't really have stopping points.
Yeah.
So you just breeze through it. It's really it's great. This is not a cozy read.
You can't put it down though.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're glued to it until the end.
I can't remember how quickly I read it. I think I was probably about 2 to 3 days. I had it done.
Yeah.
I also didn't put it down.
So the tragic thing, the Easton Press did produce a special edition of this that now sells. It's signed by Daniel Keyes, and it sells for like $500. But otherwise, currently there isn't like a folio or a sun tup you can buy of Flowers for Algernon. There needs to be.
Yes.
And if they don't do it, we will.
Yeah, because we're ready.
Yeah.
And we won't put circuit boards on our shit.
No. This has nothing to do with computers, guys. If you get this SF Masterworks edition, it has nothing to do with computers or electronics.
It's deceptive. Deceiver! Anyway.
I mean, they aren't even planting a chip to do the surgery.
No.
That chips didn't exist.
Well, it's kind of like the Frankenstein thing, too, where pop culture has, made you think that it's all by electricity, but it's not. It's an entire biological chemical process. So everyone's like, oh yeah, the lightning in Frankenstein. That never happened. There was no lightning.
Frankenstein, he goes into a room and nothing is really described of what actually happens in that room.
Except chemistry and biology.
Yeah. It's very vague. And it kind of is in this. There's an operation, a surgical operation, but exactly what they do in there, whether they implant something or cut something or graft something,
whatever they're
or
messing
what they're
with.
Doing is left to the imagination. And that's good, actually, because it's really not important what they did, how they did it. They did it.
Yeah. It
That's
was
all
done,
that matters.
and now it's about the person.
What matters is how it impacts Charlie.
Yep.
which is great science fiction. Science fiction should be about how technology changes us, or can change us, or how a technological situation can illuminate our lives.
And it should consider the ethics surrounding the issue.
And this does all of that in bucketfuls.
Amazing. Amazing. I have nothing else to say about it. You pretty much said all of it, which is great. Because it's everything I had hoped for you when you read this and more. When I found out you had read this, I'm like, this is a phenomenal book. And you're like, we're doing it. I'm like, good, because we need to. This is a life-changing piece of work. Yeah, it's an excellent read. Yeah. Don't go into it lightly.
No, but go into it. Don't
Don't be afraid of it. Do not be afraid of it. It is unnecessary work. Yeah. So. Because
this is going to blow all of your mega fantasy series and historical romances and space operas and
everything.
And first contacts and time travel stories. Is going to blow all of it out of the water. And it's even going to blow away Steinbeck and Hemingway and Shakespeare and all of them and make them look like they were just preparing us for this.
Yes. They walked so this could run.
Right.
And even go to super speed. But yeah. You all set?
Yeah, let's end it.
Otherwise, we're just going to repeat ourselves and find more to talk about. And if we have to do a part 2 of this sometime, too, I'm open to that. So if you think about it more and come up with more things, feel free to make other videos. So
the only part 2 would be me losing it, which I'm glad I held myself together.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. Well, thank you guys for joining us. Like, subscribe. Join our Patreon for more of being able to support us while we make wonderful pieces of... I don't know, content. Yeah. Well, we make these reviews for you, and it also helps support us in trying to make beautiful pieces of literature and publishing our own works that we think need to have a really good publication, which might end up being Flowers for Algernon in the future.
Yeah, if you support us on Patreon, maybe we can raise enough money that we could actually publish this in a beautiful edition.
Beautiful edition of Flowers
with awesome illustrations, because it
deserves
like I say, the Easton Press, but I don't really love the Easton Press books.
So.
Don't like those stupid line art things they put on their covers. I think that's a bad decision. They don't look good.
Yeah. They are kind of
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys again for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.